Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to a conversation on filmmaking with Brian Ralston is today's guest, and he was the composer. He did the score for Him and Her for us, which we were super fortunate and lucky and grateful for. And beyond that, he's just like an awesome human being. Sorry, my dog wants to join this conversation too. She's a mess. Anyway, so without further ado, let me invite Brian to chat with us. Super excited this worked out to have him come talk to us because composing is something that's very important to film and really hard to get right, in my opinion. Hi, Brian.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Hold on, I have to
Good.
deal with this diva that wants to hang out with us.
We have a guest joining.
We have a guest, yes. We have a surprise guest.
Awesome.
You look like you are in your studio.
I am. Colored lights.
Love it.
Creative stuff. Yes.
Totally.
This is my little sanctuary.
It's amazing. So grateful to have been able to create in there with you guys. Me, not so much, but more you and Ice, the director.
Yes. There's a sofa back there I think he slept on while we did revisions on things.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Go give me 3 hours and I'll wake you up and we can listen to it again. Yeah.
So sweet. So how do you, you're the composer for our film, Him and Her. How did you start on a project?
On this project or any project? Only because they're all so different. So, how a project comes to you could be a variety of ways. This came to me through a mutual friend of ours, and you all were looking for somebody. I think the composer is always the last one hired on a project. Or one of the last ones hired on the project. So that has benefits and it has drawbacks. I think the benefit is that there's a fresh set of eyes that come in and look at something and is going to add a significant creative input to what's going on, which can be scary. And that's a lot of that, getting that right is just having conversations with, in this case, with Ice and the director and who's like kind of sitting here with me and really trying to understand what his vision of the music should be and where the film has come from. And of course the edit is constantly changing and everything else too. So it's really trying to underline what is the intent of this scene and that scene. And, we spot the film and decide where music should go or not go. This film actually, because of our post-production happening really kind of during the pandemic, we had an awful lot of time to kind of revisit things over many months. And so,
can be a blessing or a curse.
Exactly. So, but I think of one scene towards the end of the film, like there's a piece of music that I think we did 3 or 4 times for, and didn't know if we were going to have any music at all. And what's in the film was actually written almost a year later than some of the other stuff that we had started, and it's just, it's always interesting coming back to something, after a period of time and with a fresh set of perspective and to kind of take another crack at it. So,
yeah, that's super cool. Is there, how do you, I guess this might be a weird question, but how do you sort of budget time-wise for a project? Because I feel like ours dragged on a significant amount of time above what any of us anticipated.
If anyone asks me how long is it going to take, I'm going to ask back, how long do you have? And then when they tell me how long I have, I'll say, well, that's how long it's going to take. I think you just keep doing the best that you can with the time and the resources that you have. The least amount of time I've done a film, which is not ideal, is 4 days, because they had a scenario where they didn't think they were going to have a score, and they didn't have a score. And in the small edit bay, it felt like it worked. And then they got on the big dub stage in that space. They're like, it just felt empty and it felt like it wasn't working all of a sudden. And They decided at the beginning of the 2-week mix, we need some score cues in here. And the mix wasn't moving and the release date wasn't moving. And they were going to lose the dub stage after that because another film was coming in, so they couldn't push it. And and I got a call from people there that know me and were involved and knew I was in between stuff and I could just come down and help them out a little bit. And so, we did like 20 some minutes of music, 20, maybe 25 minutes of music in like 4 days.
Wow.
Now, is that ideal? Is that John Williams style music? No, but it did help, and it did. We got a guitar in, and we did some other stuff and some textures and drones and other things that we were able to do quickly. Um, but budgeting time in general, it's like how much time do you have, and then we need to figure it out, kind of work our way backwards in terms of um, what we can do in that amount of time. So,
Yeah.
and sometimes we think we have, you know, 3 months, and then even that changes, and all of a sudden we had 9 months, but we didn't know that back then. And so then, then you kind of take a fresh, and then it happens in picture as well as sound. And it's just, whenever it's a collaborative thing, it always happens. Post-production is crazy.
It is. It is a moving target, I think, for a lot of films, at least for us.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
The deadline keeps changing for different reasons, and it's like
Yeah.
nailing Jello to a wall. Someone said that's hardcore, Brian. That is hardcore. I can't believe you did that. That's incredible.
I don't think I slept, but yeah, that is hardcore. But it worked out. And the ironic thing about that little project, which I'm actually kind of proud of, like it never got released in North America.
Wow.
It had Ryan Quanten in it, and it got released in Australia, and it got released overseas in other territories, and for whatever reason, it never made it here. So then, like, it's this project that I contributed to that a lot of people haven't even seen.
Secret.
Yeah.
Cool. When you start a project with a director, I can imagine that different directors have varying degrees of experience with music or knowledge of sort of music vocabulary. How do you communicate with a director or understand their vision if they don't have the sort of language to share that with you?
I encourage well, first off, it's kind of my job to interpret musically what they're wanting, even if they can't express that musically. And so, the best thing I can tell a director or even a producer, but it's usually the director who's the one that's creatively directing, is direct the composer, direct me like you would an actor. And most directors know how to do that. Most directors know how to tell an actor what they're wanting out of a scene, what they're wanting out of a character, what's your motivation for this scene, I want people to feel this or that. And if you direct the composer in a similar way, then they're speaking in their language, in the language of filmmaking and language of storytelling that they know, and they don't need to know the specific details of music. And sometimes director, and I think Ice was very much this way too. Like, he knows it when he hears it. He just doesn't know it when it's not right yet, what to say to do it. But that's not necessarily his job to say. It's keep encouraging. What's the motivation here? What are you wanting the audience to feel here? All that other stuff. So, and then that lets them keep speaking in their language of film instead of music.
I think that takes a huge degree of like trust in that relationship with the director composer to kind of be able to express in maybe unconventional ways.
Absolutely. It's the one, well, there's probably a few others, but it's kind of the one job in filmmaking that I suspect most filmmakers can't do. Like, you go through film school, and especially if you're doing short films or little independent films, you bootstrap it and you go, I can edit this myself. I'm writing my own script. I can figure out the lighting. I can do, you talk theory in film school. Sometimes you get the technical aspects of camera stuff. And a lot of filmmakers, especially young in their careers, do a lot. They wear a lot of hats and they do a lot of stuff. And unless they are specifically musicians or composers, it's the one thing they don't know how to do. So music becomes this very foreign thing. I think a lot of filmmakers, because of that, and understandably, put off to be the last one hired. I'll deal with that later. I know I have to do it, but I'm not ready yet. And they have to get into this headspace of working with someone else that has that skill set that they don't have. And I think you're right about trust. It's a lot of trust in another individual, a composer coming in, and that they're not going to mess things up, and still be able to keep your vision of what you want as a filmmaker. And it's been described to me, and I totally agree with it. It's an emotional hire. There's a lot of people that that you would hire on a film that it's like, if they have the skill set, we can do that. Yes, that's fine. Even sound design, there's a level of sound designing that's very creative, but there's a level like ADR and Foley that's not. It's just very technical, and you can do it. And there's not an emotional hire about getting a Foley artist to do what they need to do, because it's on screen what they need to do. But music, it's not. It's an emotional hire. And everybody has opinions about music. Even, the costumer has a favorite song that they were listening to that inspires them. And so it becomes this very subjective thing where everybody's doing, and you just kind of have to focus in on what it is the filmmaker wants. So
I think it speaks a lot, complimentary to you and your temperament as just a human being. You're just a rad human being, and we're so grateful and lucky to have worked with you. But I think it would be hard. So our pleasure. Thank you for everything. Brian's delivered the score, but continuing to help in all these little details and areas and above and beyond what his call of duty is. It's just grateful. So grateful.
That's probably my fault, is that because I have produced other things as well, so I know a lot of people, and so I end up, and composing is just problem solving. It's problem solving in the music department, but it's producing music, as it said, producing film. And so so sometimes I know someone I can help. And then it just steamrolls into doing those other things.
Grateful. It was a huge benefit to us. But I think it also speaks to working with you, which may be different from working with other composers. You don't have a huge ego. You have a huge expertise, and to have a director come in who doesn't have that expertise and have to tell you hey man, do it like this or something like that, that's gotta be hard. But you do it with such grace. It's really cool. Thank you.
I've learned over 19 years of doing this that there's and I say this in a positive way, there's a psychologist component to often what we do, because I think the director, who is putting a lot of trust in us, just wants to feel heard. And sometimes they just want to feel like that they've gotten to try at least what they want to try, and they'll see for themselves if it works or not, and you have to give them that space. And, you mentioned my studio. That's part of why this studio is kind of the colorful, creative space that it is, because I want people to come in here and have a comfortable space where they feel like they can be heard and be creative and work. And so it's all part of the plan.
Part of the master plan. It's great. I love it. How do you decide when you see a film? Is it often the director comes to you and says, I want score here, here, and here? Or do you make suggestions hey, I think it would really help in this scene? And then at the same token, how do you decide not to do score? That might seem like a harder choice sometimes.
It's all the above. So I think a director will absolutely have opinions where score should go. I think, and they will have strong opinions where it should not go. I will have probably a different perspective on that, just from being a musician and having done this a lot, which may agree with some of those things and may disagree. The first thing I'm going to do is hear them out, because they know their film better than I do. They've been with it for years. And I'm the last one coming in. So that's kind of number one. Number two, if there's something I feel strongly about, sometimes less is more in fighting for things, but I would still probably do it and show it, even if they're not asking for it, because I think, and I would explain my reasons behind it and hope that they see it, but they may not see it the right way. I mean, again, music is subjective. So I just have to not, the music we write for films is not our symphony. It's not our thing in terms of my thing as a composer. It's our thing as a film. And so I think that's another component is composers needing to get away from my score. It's our score. It's a collaborative team effort. And it just, it comes from a lot of back and forth listening. I think that's also why directors, when they find a composer that they really gel with and communicate with, they tend to stick with them. Yeah. And you see these teams, these director composer teams, like the Spielberg, John Williams, and Alan Silvestri and Robert Zemeckis and Tim Burton and Danny Elfman. Like you see these pairs go through J.J. Abrams and Michael Giacchino, that once they find someone that it gels and it works and the communication works, then they don't want to stray from that, because it's really hard to find that and it's really hard to build. And then you find these collaborative teams that kind of come out together. It's a really unique relationship that I don't think emotionally people necessarily have with all their department heads as a filmmaker. They might have it with their cinematographer and their editor, you know, the core people that are putting up what's on screen. But many others, they don't.
Is the film normally quote unquote picture locked by the time it gets
No.
to you? No. Okay.
I would love it to be picture locked. That's the goal, but it never is, with digital editing and everything else these days that can be changed at the last minute. The challenge is that what takes seconds to slice out, can we just cut here and here and slice it out? We only took out 5 seconds, and if it was already scored, that 5 seconds is not a 5-second fix musically, because usually the music, if we're doing this how it's supposed to be done, music is composed through the picture, and sometimes my tempos and everything are picked out based on that picture edit. And now if I had a downbeat here and we just move that downbeat 5 seconds forward, or that picture edit 5 seconds forward, that might be hours of work for me to manipulate or change where the music now hits to make it, because we still want the hit to happen there. It just happens at a different place now. And so picture lock is kind of always changing, and it's just something we have to deal with. At a certain point, if the music is already recorded, the easier way to do that is to edit the music audio and not to go back in and re-record. You wouldn't pull an orchestra back in to redo the cue for a 5-second change. You would just take the recordings that you have and slice them and kind of
manipulate those,
crossfade them and manipulate those and make them work. And that's where a music editing fix becomes what you do.
Yeah. So if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the comment box while we're chatting. But what you just said about re-recording brings me to my next question, which is MIDI versus a live orchestra or some kind of live musician.
My favorite topic.
Yeah. Could you speak about, educate us on that? How do we?
Sure.
Yeah.
So for filmmakers that, are less versed on this, so sample libraries that we have, the orchestra in the box in the computer, they inherently, these days anyway, come from live recording. So they literally will take, a string section of violins or a single violin and record every note, played from soft to loud, played at different articulations. And those little snippets of audio recordings sit on the hard drive, and then we have a computer sample program that when we play them in, like on a piano as an input device, it sounds like a violin playing. It is ultimately a human playing those notes. We're playing back the audio recordings of that, and then multiply that over the entire orchestra, and you have an orchestra in a box. The problem with that is it is, to me, music is not the notes that I write. It is what you do with the notes. It is what happens in between the notes. It is a emotional expression. And in order to do that, you need to have an emotion. You need to have a performance behind it. And that is where the human element comes in. And I think that's where, when people go on a scoring stage and see a score come together, there's something magical there that happens with live people performing that you almost can't explain. And to me, that is because it's the performance of what's happening with the notes and the slight crescendos and the decrescendos, and the fact, an orchestra doesn't sound perfectly in tune if you break apart all the individual sections or pieces, but it's the group of that together that sounds like a string orchestra. Computers tend to be exactly in tune, and just playing a recording of a violin 12 times does not make a 12-section violin section sound like it, And so it's all the little inaccuracies that make it human and give it expression, and then ultimately translate on the screen as an emotion or something best. And I will also say that so now I'm getting in strong opinions. Everything about a film is manipulative. It is storytelling to the nth degree. And even like, in the sake of Him and Her, like how it was shot, how you know, the method acting part of what ICE was forcing the actors to do, and the fact that our actors did not meet when we shot the film, and throughout the film they didn't know each other. All of that is a manipulation to get a certain thing on screen to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so music or the use of score or whatever is a further manipulation to get the audience to feel a certain way. You know, you put the camera here because you want them to see this, not everything over here. And the same thing with score is done the same way. And so I just look at how we decide what goes where, whether we're using live people or not, and how we're doing it. It's all part of what is going to be the most effective way to tell this story, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I'm always going to be supportive of putting live musicians into a score, into the performance of a score, even if the budget doesn't support an orchestra. You know, do what you can with the samples, but layer in some live elements on top of that, or soloists or something, because it is that human element of the performance of the music that really makes it have the emotion component that you want.
Yeah, a depth you can't get just with a
Yeah.
perfect digital file.
Yeah, and there's a lot in the Him and Her score that is sampled. I mean, it was kind of an 80s throwback in ways, so there's a lot of synthesizer stuff anyway. But we did have a live guitarist. We had, you know, Mike Zawitsky, who is an amazing guitarist and plays on a band called the Dispatch, and also a band called the Eels. He was played on many times. I mean, this is a guy that's played at Royal Albert Hall in London, you know, and he came over and he was able to do a bunch of guitar layers and guitar stuff for us, and so that was pretty awesome. So
Awesome.
even our score on our little independent film has that live element in its performance.
I'm going to come back to how I think a lot of things in films are relationship based, and that having him play was 100% based on your relationship with him, not on our ability to pay anybody anything near what their value is at all.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same, you know, relationships in this, it is a business of relationships, and those relationships pan out, one, in looking for jobs to work on and looking for work, but also once you're on work, it's relationships of, yeah, I mean, it's what performers can I bring in to do this? Who do I think will be right for this? Who can I, you know, look at some of the sound work we're doing now in post, with, you know, that's, you know, I've known Lisa Fowl, sound designer, sound mixer person, you know, since the early 90s. She actually did sound on my first student film I ever scored in 1995, something like that, at Arizona. And so, you know, and she went on a completely different path and interned at Skywalker Sound and studied with people like, you know, Gary Rydstrom's and all this other stuff, like, to become who she's going to become. But we've stayed working together ever since. And so, yeah, so it's, you know, it is a business of relationships, and relying on the people to build the teams around you to do what you can do. So when you hire a person, when you hire a department head, you're kind of also hiring their
Connections,
their network
yeah,
of people that can come in and contribute as well.
Yeah. So I went to film school at AFI, and one of the things they told us was to network. I mean, yes, like network up or whatever, but like really network laterally, because you're all going to be coming up together. And that's kind of what you just said about Lisa. Like, you met on a film school thing, and look where you guys are years later.
Yeah. Really cool. A composer in town who passed away many, many years ago, Basil Polidorus, I got to speak with him at a like CD signing once in a while. And he gave me a piece of advice that has stuck with me ever since. And that is, you know, don't try to break into the business of today, because today's directors, producers, filmmakers already have the people they trust. You have to break into the business of tomorrow. And who are the directors tomorrow, the producers tomorrow that are going to come in? And you have to get in with them now when they're young, when they're doing independent films, when they're doing all this stuff. And you kind of grow up in the industry together. You know, you have to play the long game. And so, like, your connections to AFI and everything else, I mean, both you and Dax went to AFI, you know Dax did this other thing. Dax is ultimately how I came to your all's attention. And so, it is a business of relationships in many ways.
Yeah. Well, do you have any advice for a first-time director, filmmaker who's going to be hiring a composer, what questions they should ask or what they should look for?
A couple things. One, kind of throw back to what we were talking about. Don't put off composer hire till the end. I think the more time you give them, the more they're going to be able to understand and get you what you want. And that's not always possible, but the way, especially on independent filmmaking, when your budget is not the level of a studio budget, there is a way to do things quickly. And what that is to amass more people, to pump out more music, more minutes per day. And there's only so many hours and minutes of the day for one person to do that. And so, yes, we can do that in 4 days if we assemble a team of people to do that, but there's no budget for that. So knowing that, the more time you give someone, the more they're going to be able to do really what you want and do something amazing because they had the time to work it out, right? So that's one. Two, I think I think hiring a composer, you're never going to listen to someone's demo on their website or their reel and hear the score to your film in that. I think that was a piece of music written for someone else's project, and it's with different input and for different reasons. And you might be able to take some broad lessons from that. You might be able to hear they have a broad range of compositional ability. They can do drama, they can do electronic, they can do, and if you hear that broad range, they'll probably be able to do something with you. But the most important thing on hire is, can you communicate with this person? Can you sit in a room? Can you stand sitting in a room with this person, right? Do they have the patience to listen to you, or are they just going to kind of do their thing? And that's not something you can glean from a demo reel, right? You can only learn that by spending time with that person, which then goes back to, if this is the last hire and we've got 3 weeks till it's due and blah, 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 like you don't have time. So you're setting yourself up as a filmmaker ultimately for failure and not success. So get in early in terms of looking for who that composer, who that person could be, and start spending time with them, not even working on your project. I don't know, go see movies together, go have lunch together, go talk together, see if this is a person that you can communicate on the same page with. And I guarantee you then, if you can, stylistically, that film composer can probably get you what you want. Because one of the things that's attracted me to this job, and most every composer to this job, is that every film is different. You know, there are some composers who have kind of a style or a thing, and they do that one thing well, and they kind of can't move out of that. And that's fine. And there is a place for those people. But a lot of film composers are chameleons in their style, and they pride themselves on being able to work on different styles and different things. And it's all about the communication with them. And do you like them? And are they listening to you? And will they write it 30 times without giving you grief? And allow you to reject it and say, okay, well, let's try something else. That's hard to find, and that will not be heard on someone's demo reel that was written for some other project.
Yeah.
So the hiring of this emotional hire needs to be done differently than just looking at a credit list or listening to a demo reel, in my opinion.
Oh, totally agree. That was great advice. Excellent advice. Does anyone have any question for us before we close this out? Brian, is there anything that we didn't touch on? I know we touched kind of on a big picture of a lot of things, but
yeah. You know, I don't think so. I mean, I could talk about this all day because I teach in the film scoring program at UCLA. So
yes.
I also, you know, I talk about this a lot.
That's so cool. We got to go to your class once. That was really fun.
You did. And hopefully
great.
that'll happen again. We actually gone back in person in the spring for the first time since fall of 2019. So
wow, good.
Because it's been Zoom remote ever since,
which is
hard to
energy.
Yeah. But starting in April, we'll get to go back in person. So.
Oh, good. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there are not any more questions, you know where to find Brian if something comes up later on. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Wait,
Absolutely.
question. course, Ice has a
Oh,
question.
oh, of course, it's ice. What's the hardest thing score-wise to do with the director? Work while he's sleeping on my sofa.
Snoring, probably. Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Ice? No, I've just gotten used to it. It's not bad. But I will say that a lot of musicians aren't used to it because they need, you're providing a safe space for actors on set, right? Because they're asking them to emote and do things that sometimes are not natural. I got to provide a safe space for a director to work and feel like they're heard and everything else. But at the same time, that composer sometimes needs a safe space to do stupid things and to make mistakes and to spend an hour going through and trying to create a sound in some synth program that's the drone sound that I want, and to be able to kind of tinker free from someone that might go, no, that's not it. No, that's not it.
Right.
Not that they all do that, but sometimes you need that safe space just as a creator to do that, and so so it is kind of good sometimes to meet and talk and then go away. I actually even set out a hammock out in the backyard a couple times, and I said, Phil, it's a beautiful day. Feel free to go out, sit out there, and I'll come out and get you when I'm ready. Just he was here, but just to kind of like
no, you need your privacy to do your thing. Yeah,
exactly. So
we had another question from someone asking about where does a sound engineer meet a composer? I'm not sure.
Good question. There are actually a lot of them in the Society of Composers and Lyricists that kind of hang out because it's our crowd of people. Word of mouth works. I mean, there's a whole community of sound recordists and engineers as well, but Lisa Val, I love Damon Tedesco. I love Damon also teaches at UCLA, and he's the stage manager at 20th Century Fox. Well, it's not 20th Century Fox anymore, but at Fox Score and Stage. That I guess Disney didn't get that stage. That property stayed with Fox after the Disney purchase. But but there are a lot of recordists. Hollywood Scoring is a music contracting company that I use for almost all of my stuff. My music contractor, No Gladstone, is there, but Adam Mihalik used to be the stage recordist and engineer, the in-house engineer at the Sony stage, and he's now one of the partners at Hollywood Scoring. They built a new scoring stage in town. So Adam Mihalik is great. It's really probably just asking around. So
back to that relationship thing.
Yeah, I mean, go out and listen to the works of composers that you like, how it sounds, and find out if there's any names that keep popping up in terms of who did the mix or who did the recording of it. James Newton Howard scores to me always have this sonic fidelity that is just amazing. I mean, when the bass drum hits on some big thing, you like feel that thump, and it's just so clean and clear. But the orchestra is huge, and you're like, and you go back, and it's like it's Sean Murphy on every recording, And then I go back to some of the old James Horner scores that I listened to and loved, and and some of them have Sean Murphy on it. And I'm like, okay, there's Sean Murphy, the Dennis Sands, Simon Rhodes, he's a UK engineer, but there's a lot of people that keep popping up. So,
cool.
But I will agree that if you're playing that long game, no different than a director forming a relationship with a composer forming a relationship with an engineer, and so because you can kind of develop that shorthand of working with each other over time. So don't think that you have to hire Dennis Sands to get an amazing sounding score. You would, but you probably can't afford him on some independent films. I mean, some of those guys are going to get, $50, $60, $100,000 just to be the engineer on the score. And so build relationships with young recordists and engineers that you meet through the SCL or something else. So, excellent. Or email the big names and ask if they have any recommendations. They probably have mentors and people under their wing that are equally as talented and just at a much younger place in their career.
Awesome. Very, very good advice. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask before we sign off? If you think of something later, you can always DM Brian, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any other lingering questions.
Yeah, pretty much every social media channel I have is just at Brian Ralston. So
Awesome. So everyone knows where
love
to
you
find
too,
you.
Ice.
Aw, full on bromance. So sweet. You guys are great. Thank you for the time today and for answering all these questions and
You're welcome.
giving us a
Thank you for
little
inviting me.
pleasure, a little education on what it is to be a composer. I think so many things go into making a film that people often don't realize, and it's cool to do a little deep dive into what one person's part of this
Especially in
huge
post-production. You know, a lot of people, uh, filmmaker folks get a lot of experience in production, and production is exciting and it's on set and all this other stuff. And then they get the post and it's a lot more foreign of a territory, especially when you get into like delivery stuff and you get into, you know, I mean, you're a lawyer, so you know the contractual stuff, but just like the licensing of music and that whole like thing, I mean, that stuff is not taught in schools really. And it's an element that a lot of filmmakers then just don't know. They know the camera stuff and the onset stuff and the, you know, and then they get, there's an editing portion and then we're done, right? No, it's like there's this whole other component to polishing and making a film.
Yeah.
And in post. And it's, you know, arguably where you actually make the film. You make it 3 times. You write it, you shoot it, and then you do it in post. And so, so it's a pretty big thing that hopefully folks, you know, if I can do my best and others to make it less ominous of an experience.
A little demystifying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a black hole of yeah, learning on the job.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. And you know, and the same for me. I mean, you know, I wouldn't be saying a lot of these things 19 years ago when I started too. So a lot of it has come from just learning on the job.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for teaching us all today and giving back to the film community and for your work as a composer
Absolutely.
of our film and in general,
Well,
and teaching future composers at UCLA, and just being an overall super cool human being that we're very blessed and lucky to have in our lives. We're grateful.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored to know you all and to have worked on the film as well, and hopefully we can get it out there to the world so people can see it.
Yes, for sure. Coming next.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, everybody.